from Atlanta, Fulton County.
Have but one objective.
Purple color I see. Then you maintain the status.
December 7th, 19...
A question, a psychopath.
The Orby has no...
It's a really big shoe tonight.
Will you stifle yourself?
Hey! More people.
Dynamite! Talk about, will you? Hello.
Thank you very much. You call the dummy, you big dummy.
Well, if the shoe fits, step it.
Till next week. Nanu. Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
You wouldn't like him when he's angry. Hey, everybody, it's Danny J here. It's DJB Productions, and we're here for another episode of tonight's TV lineup. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the notification bell. Leave us some comments, of course. Always want to hear from you guys. We have a great show for you guys today. But first, before we get into it, let's see who we got here watching TV with us. We got Matt Sonner.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Well, look at him right there in the apartment himself. Look at that. That's craziness.
Now I just need two hot chicks.
We got Jason Leach. There's your hot chick right there.
What's going on, good people? I'm the hot chick. Awesome.
You're the hot chick now.
Always wanted to be the hot chick.
There you go. And the guy who's got all the booze for us to make him hot, we got Chris Gordon.
Cheers.
Cheers. That's my man. That's right.
Night court.
Night. Yeah. Guys, we
This
have
is going to get me drinking in the morning. I'm feeling like that.
He totally is, honestly.
Well, isn't any hour happy hour?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a Johnny Depp quote.
That's true. There we go.
If you'd been watching the trials, he's one of the greatest quotes. I know we're not on that subject, but I just remember like the attorney going, "You had a mega pint of wine." He goes, "A mega pint." Well, you've also drank whiskey at 8 a.m. Well, isn't any hour happy hour? Like, yeah, it was great. Just love the guy. All right, anyway,
he's the coolest guy in the world. Well, what happens when you take a man who needs a place to live? You have two beautiful young women who have an extra spot and they need help with the rent.
If I had a nickel, go ahead.
Oh my God, I know, right? But here's the catch: in order to live there, you got to pretend to be gay.
Oh.
And this is in the 70s, which is a big dating boom, etc. That's what brings us to our show today. We're talking about Three's Company. This was a legendary show in my mind. It was such a great show, which follows Jack Tripper, played by John Ritter, who needs a place to stay. And he joins Suzanne Summers and Joyce DeWitt, a.k.a. Chrissy Snow, and Janet. What was Janet's last name?
Let's see. Man in the chair coming at you live.
I remember Janet.
Janet Wood.
Janet Wood. There you go. And she gave Wood. And then, you know, in this great apartment building, and I'm going to bring Matt up real quick because Matt is actually in the actual apartment. Not actually, but, you know. But there's the apartment right there. And let me tell you something. That's a great apartment. I wish I lived in an apartment like that.
Yeah, really.
Even in that decor, like leave the 70s decor. I'm there. I want to live at that fucking place, man.
Yeah, well, it was Santa Monica. That was about right.
It was some great shit right there. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the deal. What, you know, like we said before, Jack is in there, and the trope, there has to be like a thing, like, you know, what's going on? He's got to pretend to be gay in order for the older landlords, who are the Ropers, to allow him to live with these girls, which is kind of funny. It's like, it's none of your business other than like you're getting rent, but they have like a moral standing in a sense to say, hey, yeah, I'm not going to let some guy live with two girls and shack up and blah, blah, blah. So it's okay if he's gay. Now, this is a show that could quasi roughly be done today with a little bit of tweaking, of course. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that this show was offensive in any way, even back then. Because you know how sometimes shows don't translate as well. You'd sit there and say, "Oh, we couldn't do that today." I honestly think Three's Company could work today. I don't think it was offensive at all. I think John Ritter was just a freaking genius, honestly. as a prop fall comedy. He was like old school, like
Yeah.
prop comic type of scenario. And he was just so endearing, and he was just such a loving individual. They say, in real life, but also in his characters, you're like,
Yeah.
this guy's great. Like I wanted to hang out with Jack Tripper. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mhm.
Matt, I want to go to you
Yes.
first since you're in the apartment, you broke in. Tell us about your experience with Three's Company.
It was one of those shows that I didn't watch as often as other shows from the era, but it was just a great all around comedy. I mean, take anything out as far as the overall premise, like you said, John Ritter, great actor, great funny man, great physical comedian, and everything surrounding his character. No matter what you watched, I mean, it was just funny. You could sit down, watch it, and if you had never seen the show and didn't know the premise, and just pick any episode throughout the series, put it on for somebody, and unless they have a very poor sense of humor, you're going to find it funny.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
It
Now,
was just a great funny show.
I mean, it's something that like hit everybody because you had the Ropers, who were his original landlords, who were very funny. Stanley and Helen, right? It was
Yes,
Helen, right?
and Stanley, played by the great Norman Fell.
Yeah, and here Stanley was this like really stuck in the ass type, and no pun intended. You know, like he was like very like old school, old fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
And Helen was very new age, and that was the 70s, keep in mind, so she was very like hip, for a lack of a better term. You know what I mean? And was someone who was like okay with everything. Like she knew Jack was not gay.
Yeah.
And she was like, hey, you know what? He's such a good boy. They're good girls. It's not a big deal. This is not as big as you're making it out, Stanley.
Yeah,
But
they're
Stanley
they're not having Roman orgies up there,
Right, right.
Well, I always got the impression that she was, she was the type of character that would have been at Woodstock. And the fact that she got hooked up with and married Roper was kind of like, okay, I had my fun. Now I have to do this.
Yeah.
But, if you look at the time frame of the 70s, she was that sympathetic character that kind of completely, she was that, which we see see a lot of that in. We talked about that in the last episode, where a lot of the female presence, the older female presence, was the voice of reason. Mm-hmm. It was the chronic voice of reason, and Mrs. Roper was just that too.
Yeah.
She had that really good way of, she kind of got the picture, but she just let her husband be the buffoon that he was.
Yeah.
That's what you kind of did then,
And what's kind of
Stanley.
Well, what's kind of funny too is that unlike in the last episode we talked about Marion Cunningham, in this case, this is the 70s. A woman had more of a voice and stuff like that. And although the Ropers, like, even though Helen was very hip and all, like, they are still like an old fashioned family, and you kind of got that Stanley, at least in his own mind, ran the roost, even though he didn't.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't. Like Stanley was the kind of guy who was like, in his mind, this is the way things are happening. Blah 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 blah. And Helen's like, it's whatever makes you sleep well at night, basically, because I'm running the show in a sense. And it was kind of cool is that Helen became like the mom figure of the show. And it seems like every show in some way, shape, or form has a mom figure, someone to go to, to kind of bounce your younger plight off of them to get like a different perspective. And that's who Helen was.
She's like the voice of reason.
She really was. She really was. Jace, I'm going to go to you now, buddy. Tell us about your Three's Company experience.
I love Three's Company, because every character was so lovable. Like you loved every character. My favorite was Felipe, the cook at Jack's restaurant. I freaking love that guy, And as soon as I saw Jack going Felipe, and he says Eve, and I'm like, oh, I'm hooked. That's my man. But he was always like disgruntled, but he would put on a face, like a happy face, whenever he had to. But he just hated life. He hated his job. He hated people. But I freaking loved him. He was like the Eddie Haskell of the 70s,
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I absolutely loved like all the. It seemed like at least once an episode there had to be some kind of sexual innuendo that somebody's taking the wrong way, and that I always thought was funny. And being a young kid, and this is going to sound a little weird, but being like 10 to 13, you're obsessed with sex because it's something new. You're getting these feelings in your body, and I never understood why Stanley was not banging his wife more, because she was throwing it at him. She was throwing it at him every episode, and he's just like, and he's making up excuses why he can't have sex with her. And I'm just like, yo, get in there and bang her, dude.
You bring up a good point, like with like the sex part of it. I mean, I personally don't get it either. But like, with them, you're right. Like it was such a funny trope that like Stanley would constantly like she would throw herself at him, and he would make some kind of really funny way to dodge and swerve her, and then he broke the fourth wall.
Yes,
and would look at the camera and just smile. It was the funniest thing in the world.
Yes.
That he's like letting us in on his joke, which was great.
Yeah.
I used to love that just in itself, that he used to break the fourth wall and so on and so forth. But you bring up a good point. You talked about Felipe. Let's talk about the side characters. I mean, we talked about Jack. Obviously we get Joyce DeWitt and we get Suzanne Summers, who are his roommates, at least in the first couple seasons, etc.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the different roommates, etc., and go from there. But we have his best friend Larry Dallas, who lived upstairs. We were talking about this just like right before we went on the air. We were talking about this. Larry actually is a Greek individual. His name was Larry Dalopoulos. Dalliopoulos is his actual real name, and he shortened it to Larry Dallas because he's a used car salesman. And he was, and I think we all have that friend. We all have a Larry in our lives, I think. Sure. At one point or another, we had a Larry.
And if you don't have a Larry in your life, you're somebody else's Larry.
Yeah. If you don't have a Larry, you're the Larry. That's what happens. But Larry was like Jack's best friend, and Larry was the guy that always brought opportunity to Jack's lap, and it was up for Jack to now play the moral obligation of right and wrong and say, "Oh, okay. Oh, no, because Larry, used the used car salesman mentality in his dating life, in his real life. Like he wasn't like Ralph Cramden, where like everything was a new like get rich scheme or something like that. But Larry was always out there looking for that score, be it a woman or a financial opportunity or whatever.
It was a constant hustle.
Constant hustler, he was. But he proved to be like Jack's best friend, and he was a really great character on there. It brought a lot of laughs there. Jason mentions Felipe, which is like later on in the season when Jack's working at a restaurant.
Yeah, and actually, funny enough, side note, Felipe played one of the Cardinals in the movie Angels and Demons.
There you go.
Wow.
Again, just kind of like looking through our characters here.
Yeah.
I was trying to find a picture of which one he was, and I can't find it.
What, in Angels and Demons? Felipe was funny though. He was. Yeah. And then we eventually get Rhonda, who was like on the same time that Felipe was. And Rhonda was this one constant girl who was really after Jack. And Jack like would shy away from her and shit like that. But like, we're going to now get into this because we're going to break the fourth wall and we're going to get into reality for a second. Okay. Kids, if you're watching, you might want to turn this off because this is going to be for the adults. We have the premise that Jack has to pretend to be gay in order to live in this apartment with these two beautiful young women. All right, it's the 70s. I guarantee you, in real life, either Chrissy or Janet or both were going to be getting with Jack. at
Oh,
one
yeah.
point or another. You're only one toke away from a sexy party, as Stewie Griffin would say. Um, and let's go around real quick of the girls. Now we're going to talk about them in depth, obviously, but there was Janet and Chrissy. When Chrissy leaves the show, we get Cindy, who is her cousin. And then after Cindy leaves the show, we get Terry, who's just another blonde. Now, of the roommates, okay, guys, I'll start with Matt first. Which one would you most want to get with?
Jeez. I'd have to say Chrissy.
Chrissy's going to be a fucking top favorite. I'm telling you.
I mean, it is, but I mean, because I'm also kind of going to judge that off of how Suzanne Summers aged. You know, let's forget about, you know, after she left the
Thigh
show.
master. She has a thigh
You know,
master.
she stayed hot.
Oh, she did.
She
stay
just
hot.
stayed hot. So it's like, okay, Chrissy, because if bring it into reality, hook up with Chrissy, you look at what Suzanne Summers looked like later on in her life, and oh yeah.
Now Chris
Absolutely.
may agree with me on this before anything else, though. I think first season Chrissy was hotter than later season Chrissy.
Mhm.
When Chrissy started using like real deep red lipstick and started like, it seemed like she was like becoming more animated in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, that was also the time.
It was the time.
The show kicked off in 77, but by 78, 79, everyone, I mean, we're talking about the days of like where the eyeshadow and the
Lipstick.
so over the top.
Over the top, right.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And
You were in the disco phase, and we were heading
Yeah.
into the 80s where
But you look at that Chrissy, like in the opening montage theme, when the theme song's playing, that's the Chrissy that I would want to be with, because she was adorable. She was adorable then. Not that she's not hot now, but still. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But Jason, you.
Yeah.
Your choice.
Okay, here's the deal. I would I would have a fun time with Chrissy,
Yeah.
but I think at some point, the sex would get old, and you have to have some intellectual stimuli, and that's not from Chrissy. So
Right.
use up Chrissy, and then and then go with Janet to marry.
You would marry Janet.
Yeah, marry.
Look at that.
So if we're doing F, marry, kill, all right.
Yeah, we're going to do an F, marry, kill. Go ahead. We'll do F, marry, kill.
Let's see. I'd have to kill Teresa. So marry Janet, bang Chrissy, kill
There you
Teresa. Or
Who's-
Terry.
Terry. Kill Terry. Yeah, okay.
We're on a
that's right. She didn't want to be on the
we're on
show.
a proper
anymore.
name basis. That's
Poor,
Teresa.
poor Cindy, man. She's not even getting like listening to shit.
She can
Chris.
watch.
Chris, yeah, she can watch the whole time. Chris, I'm going to go to you.
Need somebody to operate the camera.
Yes.
Oh, for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, fuck, hands down, Mrs. Roper.
Because she wants it. Out of everybody there, she's the one that wants it.
Right. No, you know what?
Yeah,
And she would teach you a few things. No,
He going for the sugar mama.
even
She owns
even when,
property.
She owns property. Stop it.
well, yeah, I guess I would have been the pool boy.
Yeah, you would have.
Yeah.
That's
Anyway,
so funny.
I'm sorry. I'm having a flashback. No, for me, even when I was a kid watching the show, Janet, and and I don't know, to expound on that. Simply, there was something about Chrissy that, I mean, I could appreciate her aesthetic. Don't get me wrong, but I wasn't driven to it. It was like something told me that Janet, in my young, completely hormonal, unbalanced way, I'm sure I was at the time, something told me that Janet would have pretty much blown my mind, blown my world, like, because there was that, that intellect there.
Yes.
But, there's something else going on there too. And I think she played it well. I'm going to go with Janet, but with a close Mrs. Roper second.
I'm going to skip Mrs. Roper for a second. And the funny thing is, I was going to say I'm going to go with Janet as well, because with Janet, for me, She was a short little girl. And there's just something about a small little package that's adorable. Like I'm like, I just want to like pick her up, put her in my pocket, put her in my drawer, like type of thing. But she just seems like she would be that little Spitfire that you want. With Chrissy, I would get the impression that she would lay there and she would have to be like addressed and she would have to be tended to, whereas I think Janet wants to make you happy. What I mean? I just got that impression. Now, Terry, no, I don't want her at all. Terry's good. Like if you get like Sex in the ER or whatever that show was, Sex Brought Me to the ER. That's when you meet up with Terry because she's got to get that thing out of your ass or whatever would happen. I mean, type of thing. And then Cindy being a giraffe, she's about as tall as Chris Gordon, and she, and me being like 5'8", now I'm 5'7.5". I'm shrinking actually. Like I would put my Indiana Jones hat on and just like go to town, and be like da 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 da, and because Cindy's not getting any props in this conversation. I just want to give Cindy a little bit of prop, a little bit. She was a very pretty girl, but she overplayed, I think, the stupid blonde, which is what she was hired to do, unfortunately, and that's another thing that we're going to get into is that like. When Suzanne Summer left the show, like she was a big part of the show. She was a big part of the ratings, although John Ritter was the star of the show. And the network or the producers were like, you know what, you're another blonde. We can change you out with another blonde. So they bring in Cindy, and it didn't work as well. Cindy, just this big, beautiful blonde girl. She was probably like 6'11". I don't know what that. She seemed like she was tall as shit. Looked like a giraffe. But she was real pretty, but she just didn't have the magic that Suzanne Summers brought to the role.
Well, that's all chemistry, though. I mean,
it really is. I mean, truly.
I mean, I know what the producer's doing because I remember the dispute. It was a contractual dispute. She wanted more money.
Yes.
She thought that she was more important to the show, and I'm not saying that she was wrong. I'm saying that
right.
The show was the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And the reason I didn't bring up any of the other women in the choosing of who to spend some time with, because I tuned out when they came in. Not because I was a fan of Suzanne Summers. It was simply that I was like, this isn't the same show anymore.
Right.
It's just not the same show. I can't even,
the overall dynamic changed to the point where it's like you lost me kind of.
It's like, sometimes like when you have like, I'm going to compare it to like a rock band. You might have a rock band that has like these players in them, and it's like they're not even great musicians. But they just make this sound together, and then you bring in this really great musician, and you're like, I don't like this band anymore.
Right.
There was something very organically.
Is it like Kiss in the 90s? Like Kiss in the 90s when they took their makeup off and they had two other, they replaced Peter Criss and Ace Frehley.
That happened in the 80s.
Well, true. Yeah, it was late.
But what I mean is like more so like just the idea of there was a dynamic that the three of them had that was, and a lot of that also reflects the turning of the decade. I mean, as the 70s were closing, it was massively intense, the shift. And I mean, being the oldest guy here, I remember it. I remember the colors around you changed, everything changed, and there was this kind of different experience going into the 80s, and a lot of this, we talked about this even last week. A lot of the sitcoms and even though Three's Company came in late, like that was 77.
Yeah.
I mean, technically speaking, it's like pretty much the end of the decade.
Yeah.
But as those shows shifted into the 80s, there's just a lot of different dynamics that's happening. And it wasn't that I had anything against these new actors that were coming in to replace Suzanne Summers.
Right.
I just couldn't relate. And then, of course, you have to remember, too, it's like all of a sudden they have to cram in a backstory. Mm-hmm. They go, this is happening. And remember, it's a fucking sitcom. Right. It's like you got 25 minutes. It's like, okay, we've got to spend 10 minutes doing like sliding in the backstory of so and so. And this is before flashbacks,
Right.
you know, like nowadays on
You
Netflix.
you'd almost prefer that it's a recast. It's the same character, but just been recast almost.
Right. And you know it's
So
kind of funny
you can
too.
you can just go with it.
When
know?
when they replaced Suzanne Summers with the girl that played Cindy, can you get her name? The girl that played Cindy?
I was just looking at it, see if I remember. It's like Jenna Lee Harrison.
Yeah, I think
it
so.
was.
Yeah. When they bring her in, right? It's a
yeah,
pretty
Jenna Lee
smooth
Harrison.
transition. It's a pretty smooth transition. This is Chrissy's cousin Cindy, and that's it. And we leave it at that, and boom, boom, boom. Now we have a blonde in there, right? When she leaves and Terry comes in, you remember, and this goes to what Chris was just saying about backstories. We now get Terry in there, and for some reason, Jack, who's the most welcoming person on the planet, does not like her. And is like apprehensive to her coming in for some reason. He didn't have that problem with Cindy. He has it with Terry for some reason. And then we have a whole episode where Terry basically has to kind of like prove herself. And then towards the end and stuff like that, you know, Jack kind of comes to his senses. And remember they had a welcoming party, and he and Larry were going to prank her really bad. They had like the soda bottles they were going to shoot her with, and he ends up shooting himself with it and said, you know, I feel really bad about, because he saw that she was really like down about what was happening. And remember, if you remember this episode, when Terry's first episode when she first came in, it was like a thing where I was like I didn't understand why he hated Terry so bad, but didn't mind Cindy at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know, he wasn't getting anything from any of these girls. So if anything, he should have blue balls across the board with everybody. You know, when you think about it. But you know, getting back to what Jason brought up, which was the sexual innuendos, that's what really I think is the cornerstone of the show, is the misinterpretation of things, and they were so wonderfully, beautifully smooth at doing this. You know, two people would be in the kitchen and somebody would be outside the door, and they'd be talking really loud and saying what out of context sounds very suggestive, and the laughs were so hard, and you're at home seeing their reactions.
Right.
You know what I mean? And just it was just little simple comedy like that made it so much fun and made it so great. I'm jumping around a little bit, obviously, because there was so much that happened with this show. We eventually, the Ropers are becoming very, very popular, and the producers decide to do a spinoff, which we'll talk about a little bit later, called The Ropers. So they leave, and a new landlord comes in, a.k.a. Don Knotts, who is Ralph Furley, who is
wonderful Don Knotts.
The wonderful Don Knotts, who like you picture Don Knotts, and then you put him in like the most outrageously over the top 70s outfits possible, and he's a single guy on the prowl. Right?
Oh my gosh, yes, his outfits.
Oh, it's amazing. And he was another one that like they kept up the Jack is gay. And the funny thing is they kept the Jack is gay premise pretty much all the way to like the last season.
Yeah.
And I think eventually they tell Mr. Furley that he's not gay. But like the Ropers, well, I mean, Helen knew, but like the Ropers didn't get that reveal. It was barely touched on, other than giving the landlord the ability to give snide remarks about him being fruity or lighting the loafers or whatever the term was at that time, you know,
right.
And which gave him that like that little nudge, like which as the viewer we get that reminder. Oh yeah, by the way, that's the premise of the show. Jack is supposed to be gay. That's why he's allowed to be here in the first place, you know. But the friendships that we get with now Mr. Furley, who was just such a great character. All meeting at the Regal Beagle, which I would have loved to have gone to Regal Beagle. Regal Beagle looks like a great place to go drink.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've been to some places with Chris Gordon, and like none of them are like that. So, I'm just saying. You know what I mean? Like, you
That's
know,
because I keep drinking them out of stock.
yeah, that's right. You're not allowed in all these places.
They see me coming.
You know, but we go to the Regal Beagle, which was the other set, because it was always this apartment that Matt's in right now, or the Regal Beagle. You know, and
Once in
we
a
get
while in the Ropers.
yeah, it had the Roper's apartment,
Yeah.
right? Very
That's
rarely
about
were you
it.
in Larry's. Very rarely, maybe 1 or 2 episodes you were in Larry's. That was about it. But because Larry had sometimes would host a date, and Jack would have to interact with him while he was on the date, so that's why you'd be in Larry's apartment. But you know, we get all that there. We go through all that, but let's real quick. We're going to talk about the spinoff. We're going to talk about the Ropers. Now, here's something where the characters of the Ropers are seemingly funny and are really bringing a lot of comedy to the show, but can barely hold their own in their own show. And I think that's because they really played up the supporting cast a lot better than the lead, in a sense.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's just, I mean, it's no knock on them, but that was just the way it was. That the Ropers were great supporting casts. You know, you wanted them as background characters. You having them as the lead. There's only so much you can. The old people trying to find themselves in a young world is you're going to do it. You know what I mean? That type of thing.
The crazy thing was too, again, you know, in prepping for the episode, again, you know, checking some, you know, backstory on some of this. Norman Fell and Audra Lindley, who played Helen.
Played Helen, right?
When it was proposed to them, their own spinoff, the network and the producers and all said, "Look, we're going to give you your own show, and if it doesn't make it past the first season, we're going to bring you back."
Right.
Your spot in this show is guaranteed if your spinoff doesn't make it more than one season.
Right.
It made it a season and a half.
Yeah.
It got canceled halfway through the second season.
Yeah.
And when they
Wait a minute,
they're like going, nope, deal
Smell
lost.
something.
If it didn't last more than a season,
I smell something.
they got
right?
screwed.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Screwed.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you this: what do you guys think, the Ropers versus Mr. Furley? Who brought you more comedy?
See, I've got my answers are too long.
We don't have that much time.
You know, again, I get back to it was Furley funnier. Absolutely, it's Don Knotts.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be honest with you again because I'm the oldest fucker here, so I can say this.
Yeah.
When Don Knotts took that gig, I felt at the time he was jumping the shark. I'm like, this motherfucker needs a job.
Right.
Because I was like, at that point, I had already kind of like been like, I've had enough. Like, okay, you know, there was this dynamic that worked. And again, I wasn't a huge fan. Speaking earlier, we didn't, you know, I will speak on how I felt about the show itself.
Right.
As a quick aside, the reason I had an issue with the show in the beginning was the fucking theme song.
Wow.
I hated it.
Yeah.
Now the irony is it was composed by Joe Raposo, who wrote the theme song for Sesame Street and the Electric Company.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, those are badass tunes. And then do, and I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, but it's so catchy.
At the end,
Yeah.
no,
but
the
it's
French lyrics.
Yeah, it was just it was so saccharine. It was too delicate for my. Remember, I'm going through the changes at this point, and I'm like, do. I don't give a fuck. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just was. So I wanted to kind of preface that, but no, the reason that the Roper duo, the Ropers as the landlord, and the whole premise of the show, the reason it completely connected and made sense to me. And again, I get that Don Knotts, like, you know, coming in as Furley. I get it, and I watched those episodes. But again, I was like, man, Don, dude, with the toupee. I mean, I get that he had to wear that for the character, but I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it was cool. But the thing I liked about what the Ropers were doing was because as I got older and thought back on it, I started to really read into this, and it's probably, I'm probably being over too much philosophy here on this idea. But so you have a gentleman who's pretending to be gay to be able to live with these two women because these landlords, or the landlord, if you will, is too old-fashioned. The interesting thing I found about that, if you think about in today's culture about inclusivity and gay rights and everything, it's like, well, Mr. Roper was pretty fucking inclusive. He's like, oh, he never he made fun of him, but he never really judged him for what he believed he was.
Right.
His thing was, oh, you can live here. It was almost as if to say, oh, well, if you're straight, you can't live here because I don't want you having these orgies with these two women, because that's, of course, where his mind went. But as a gay man, you're more than welcome. I love the dichotomy there is not lost on me. Mm-hmm. There's an irony in that. And the funny thing, interesting, too, is that it was the 70s.
Right.
That shit was going on all the time. I mean, you know what I mean? Like the 70s were, the sexual revolution had already peaked. Yeah. And now they were doing shit that made that look really pedestrian. However, that's not the way TV presented the world. The TV presented the world in almost a counterculture to what was really going on. Right. There were many straight dudes. Matter of fact, I just had a neighbor move out of my complex here. 2 women that he had in 2 different condo units. And I used to sit out there and watch him walk between the 2 of them. One busy motherfucker. I was like, and he's like, yeah, dude. He goes, man, I'm busy tonight. And I'm like, I can tell. It's like, nowadays, like, to get back to your point, like, would Three's Company work today? I don't know. If
you're watching that guy go back and forth, are you singing the Three's Company theme song while he's going back and forth? Because I think it's like apropos then. It's like, come and knock on my door.
He was too young. He was too young. He wouldn't have gotten it.
No, I would have been like, to my window.
He's like 20. He's like 23 years old. He wouldn't even have gotten it.
God bless him.
Yeah.
God bless him for being an adulterer. Mm-hmm. But so we get the Ropers as a spinoff there, and we're going to get into this a little bit too. But there was another spinoff as well after the show ended. But the characters we talked about, and like Jason brought up Felipe, I brought up Rhonda. These were later on where Jack's dating. Really, like when you think about it, his dating scene was pretty mild for what he was trying to be or what he was going to be, because Jack was a pretty wholesome dude. He was trying to be a chef. When I liked that they kept that scenario that he was into cooking and he was trying to be a chef, and he remained trying to be a chef the entire time, even into the sequel series that they did, which I thought was kind of cool. But I call bullshit because I would have been hitting it with Janet. I totally would have been hitting it with Janet that entire time.
I don't know, man. I think there's a dynamic, though. And, again, with age comes an interesting look back on wisdom.
Yeah.
I've lived in many places. I've lived in many, many situations. And I can tell you from my experience that it looking back on it, it's not, as a young person, I can see like, oh man, why wouldn't you like, or if you've had a few, you're sitting around having a few one night and like, that just happened. But I've been in situations where that shit doesn't happen, man. Yeah. Like everyone has their own dynamic, their own life. And you know what? In a way, I can kind of see that the reason it might have worked was because neither of them were his type.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not really, I'm not.
And you talk about a type, which brings me into now going into towards the end of the series. Now we get, we've had how many seasons was that, Matt?
Let's see. It was let me pull up IMDb again here.
Matt, man in the chair.
It was 77 to 84. That much.
It was 8 seasons.
8 seasons. That's impressive. That's impressive back then, not for anything.
174 episodes.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
especially because it's the turn of the decade
yeah. And you bring up a great point of saying
and the turn of
decade-
an administration, right?
yeah, you're getting a scenario where what was cool, what made the show great in the 70s potentially would not make it great in the 80s, and it still actually filtered in pretty well. It fizzled. I mean, granted, I think we all can agree towards the end when we started getting the characters like, no offense, like Felipe and Rhonda, who were these mainstay characters coming in. It was like when they add people in for ratings,
Yeah.
type of thing.
They gotta have some fresh faces because other characters are starting to get stale.
Right, exactly. I think we even get a call in from Cindy towards the end, from Chrissy towards the end.
Yeah.
In the last episode, I think we get a call in from her to kind of like just kind of wrap everything up, which is kind of cool. But what happens is we get a spinoff. Not the Ropers, obviously, like you said, they screwed them. It was that was a big thing that it went a season and a half, and just so they didn't have to bring them back. You know what I mean? But
do you think that was because Mr. Furley was working out so well?
I
Or do
think
you
so.
think okay?
I think so. I think he was working out well. I think in comparison, Don Knotts is bringing more to the table
Right.
than those two. Just from like what they were doing, and Don Knotts did not repeat what they did, and I think that was actually pretty cool too. That he replaced them, but he wasn't a carbon copy of them. He was his own.
It was truly a new guy, and it's like,
And he did 4 seasons. Like he actually did more seasons than
right.
Now, and I know I said earlier, I sounded like I was disparaging the great Don Knotts, but I wasn't. I think it was just a shock, or for me, at that age when watching it, it took me longer to like get that, because remember, I wasn't an avid Three's Company watcher. Right. I wasn't, I mean, I did watch it, but I mean, I was still heavily encompassed in all the other ones, but this one, this one, when he came in, and I remember my father being a huge Don Knotts fan from his earlier works. Even my dad would sit and watch it, and he and I would discuss it. Oh. My dad and I were like that. We'd sit there and discuss shit. Well, we were like my father and I were the original MST3K guys. We're going way back. So my dad and I'd be sitting there, family, my mom's watching TV, everyone, and my father and I would just shit on the whole movie, just doing the same thing that MST3K later did. Yeah, just the two of us back and forth, just like and my mother used to, she would get pissed, but then she'd be laughing while she's pissed. She's like, God damn it, I just want to see this show, but that's kind of funny.
Because you're making points, right? Because you're making points, which is
I don't care who you are. Funny right there.
And my father was a sharpshooter, like he was like an insane wit, like he could just eviscerate something in a funny way. He was like the Bill Burr of his time,
That's all.
And I was like, remember going, and I remember sitting and watching these episodes with Don Knotts, and I remember my father, who of course I loved this guy and admired him. I remember him sitting there, kind of shaking his head, going, "I don't know, man. I'm not sure about this yet." So I'm saying that to say that there was an outside influence on my intake of the Ralph Furley character, which is not fair of me to say,
right? Because
I had this, I had this voice in my head next to me, so I don't. That's why I'm kind of trying to keep a little quiet about Ralph Furley, because
you should, because Ralph Furley was a master of karate, if you remember.
And that's the one thing that I enjoyed so much about Don Knotts. I mean, through his entire career, they just, the weird facial expressions he would do and everything. Like he would tell a joke that would be funny on its own.
Yeah.
But the way he would animate himself, whether it's just his general body language or his face, was like this extra little and like boom, little joke you weren't expect coming, comes out from the left side, and you're just like, okay, I'm done. You're on the floor.
it goes back to what we said about John Ritter, though, about being a great physical comic. And Don Knotts, by far, was such an amazingly physical comic. And like you said, like he was so animated that you couldn't help but laugh at him. And then to think that this guy's out there trying to score with women, and he would go for girls like Cindy and Chrissy, and he didn't go for the girls in the apartment, but he would go for girls that young. And it was like, what was kind of funny is that in a lot of cases back then, the girls would give him the time of day. You know,
it was like the original. If I keep going for it, eventually somebody's going to say yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's also in those days. God, I can't believe I fucking know this. In those days, if you with the wide lapels and a certain like suit, and you wore a piece, a certain piece, that was like that mean you had money because pieces back then were not cheap. Like if you went and got a piece, like, and it had this thing, it was like, oh, and here he is. He's a landlord. He's doing his thing. And I did respect the idea that Don took that character that way, as opposed to Roper, who was, and I have my whole philosophy on the whole Roper thing, and how it plays into even the supposed Jack Tripper. Yeah, it's fun. I get it messed up because it's John Ritter, Jack Tripper.
Yeah,
fun. But I have my own philosophy on Norman Fell's character of Stanley.
Yeah,
and believing that Jack Tripper's gay, and his push off of his advancement of his own wife.
Yeah,
follow me down that road.
Yeah.
That because here he's almost I protest too much, where he's like making fun of Jack for this, for the homosexuality, but he's somewhat repulsed by women in general. Like in the, I'm not saying that makes one homosexual. I'm saying that there's an interesting connection there.
Yeah,
in terms of how he pushes his wife away. Remember, they didn't have any kids.
Yeah.
There were no children from the Ropers.
Wow, did this get dark?
Oh, I don't know why you asked me on these shows, because I'm going to go there. I'm going to find the rabbit hole and I'm going to go down. I'm telling you.
Because you know what? That's what's entertaining.
That's right.
We know entertainment here.
Bottom line, it was $4.75 a month.
But I found that always stayed with me. Like
that's the interesting and anybody out there who watched, and there's a lot of avid watchers. When I told people that we were going to be doing Three's Company, I have a lot of like Three's Company fans like, oh, I can't wait to see that. Guys, think about what Chris just said for a second and see if there's anything that you feel like, is he going down the right hole with this? I would love to see the comments down below and hear. And hear from you guys, because I think you got something going, Chris. I think you really got something psychologically going with Mr. Roper.
I think there was more to Mr. Roper than met the eye, and I think the writers and perhaps Norman Fell played on that so subtly, so beautifully, that there's this kind of, hey,
Right.
I sometimes wonder if Norman Fell and the producers get together after like an edit and says, do you think anyone will ever get this? Do you think anyone will see this? Do you think anyone will see the subtext?
Because you know what, though? You're talking about two generations, right? And Norman Phelps, Mr. Roper is like, you meet your girl, you get married, you make her a housewife, blah, blah, blah. Very dun, 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 dun. And Jack, being this young guy in the 70s, like you said, it's the love revolution at that point. These kids are fancy free. They're on soapboxes. They're protesting. They're doing all kinds of stuff. So they're two opposite characters or two opposite scenarios. But being this way doesn't mean you feel this way. You just hide. It's a common concept that I felt this way, but because of the time, you didn't do that, so I kept it to myself. So you make a very valid point about Mr. Roper, in a sense.
Well, look, I could do a whole show based on that idea alone. I mean, the thing I found fascinating about it, and and growing up in that time was that I mean, especially, I mean, if you're gonna, if we're gonna touch on the homosexuality,
yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a time, and my father and I both were in theater.
Mm-hmm.
So homosexuality was as normal to me
Yes.
as Monday Night Football.
Right.
It was a thing. Okay.
Yeah.
And my father and I always had the same kind of idea. It was like we cared as much about their sexuality as they cared about ours. In other words, none of us gave a shit. It didn't matter to us. It was like, that's it, it wasn't even a differential. It wasn't even a differential. It was
right,
which is the way I've always been, because it never mattered to me. To the point where, many of my friends, I mean, I know, and they know, but it's, we're not sitting around going, "Hey, how's your day? Oh, it's gay." Like it's not a. It's not a. It's not a
It doesn't
discussion.
change anything. It
doesn't change anything
Right,
because, like I said, they care as much about my heterosexuality as I do about their. Doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that they played on this in this show, and how, and it was interesting to me too as a young kid, because even though John Ritter was playing a gay man, I actually thought John Ritter was gay in real life.
Yeah.
I did. I thought that. I don't know why. I don't know why.
Right.
I kind of got the impression that he was gay.
He plays that role a little too well.
And imagine my surprise when I found out he wasn't. I was like, "Oh, he's not gay." I mean, it didn't matter to me, but I thought that was interesting.
It's because he played it that well. Now, we're getting ready to close the show here, so we're going to go into the end of the season, the end of the series, where we there's a reveal. Hey, I'm not gay, Mr. Furley. So you can calm down. Blah blah blah, and he finally settles down with a woman. I forget her name. Matt, you could probably
Vicky.
start looking this up. Vicky.
Vicky, she was a flight attendant.
She was a flight attendant, right? Which in itself sounds hot, but the woman wasn't that attractive. She wasn't anywhere compared to the sex pots that were on this show.
Right.
And we get now the show Three's Company ends after 8 seasons. And then we get a new show, a spinoff called Three's a Crowd. And what we have here is that Jack Tripper marries this girl.
Actually, they don't get married.
No, they don't get married. I thought they were married because he opens his Jack's Bistro.
Yeah. As
I thought they were married in that. No.
Now, Janet marries Philip Dawson.
Okay.
Jack proposes to Vicky, and even though she loves him, she turns him down since she doesn't want to get married, and she just wants to live with him. And he's at first like, no. Then he changes his mind, and they just start living together above his bistro.
Right, and he opens Jack's Bistro, which was that was his plan, and that was his dream from the first time he came into the show. So we get that kind of payoff in that sense. The show is atrocious. It's not funny at all. It's horrible. The set at Jack's Bistro is very dark, and it's not very inviting. It was doomed to fail from the very beginning. So that's what happens with that. It looks just like what Chris Gordon's picture looks just like right now. It looks just like that. But it was an atrocious ending. It was something where it's like, you know what? Maybe we could have just stopped at Three's Company. The Three's a Crowd title, I always thought was a put off in a sense, because it's like Three's Company, Three's a Crowd. Now it's like, I get what you were saying.
Because the phrase was always two is company, three's a crowd.
Right.
And which why, even though we say we hated the theme song, at least Chris and I did, is that the lyrics literally are three's company too.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
it's like,
hey,
now you're going. So now it's like, hey, three isn't all necessarily a crowd. Sometimes three is still company.
But then we get to this show.
Company.
Then we get to
And
this show, and we're like, no, we were fucking
Three's a
bullshitting,
crowd,
dude.
you know,
Three's,
and it's like, well,
three's definitely a crowd. It should have been 2.
yeah. Which makes you sit there and say, well, yeah, we thought that, Three's company, but, Three's not a crowd. But no, shit, 3 is a crowd. What
Now
the fuck are we doing?
Like now you're turning your back on the whole thing. I just went through 8 seasons. Now you're saying fuck it. No, you were right. 2's company, 3's a crowd. Fuck it. So Jack's Bistro, and it sounded like a presumptuous fucking place to eat anyway. Like
One season, 22 episodes.
Yeah, not good. Just not good. Was Felipe on that? I don't know if Felipe went on that. I don't think he brought anybody over. He might have brought Felipe. No?
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's the thing, too. When you go into it, and really John Ritter is the only guy, it's like, I don't think you're going to have the same magic, because even John Ritter needed his supporting cast.
Yeah.
I think in that show. And, of course. Now, we'll talk about a lot of these great stuff or whatever, but once again, Three's Company, what a great show this was. It's still playing in syndication to this day, 40-something years later, almost 50 years later. And it's just such a great show. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, check it out. I know it's on a lot of stations. You can go into your voice remote, look, Three's Company, it'll pop up. You'll be able to see it. I think it's just an awesome show to watch, and something that, like Matt said earlier in the episode here, turn on any episode, you're going to laugh. It doesn't matter what season it was. You're really going to laugh, because they were able to maintain, even with the new characters towards the end, like we talked about, a certain dynamic that really went to those people. In other words, the show molded around the characters that they had on the show, rather than the characters being added in and trying to mold to the show, which I think is why it was successful in that sense. If that makes sense.
It's very, for lack of a better term, very organic, the way that the characters
it was
were brought in.
Probably one of the most organic shows that was out at that time, I would say.
Yeah, they didn't like force a character. They brought in a character. If it worked, it stayed there and it progressed. And if it didn't work, they just kind of slowly disappeared.
Yeah,
without much fanfare.
Like Chuck.
Yeah,
like Chuck Cunningham, just disappeared. Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack and Chuck. No, so
the
guys,
the Three's Company Twilight Zone crossover episode.
Yeah, right, exactly. But guys, I hope you enjoyed today. Leave us some comments, hit that notification bell, hit that subscribe button down below. Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you,
Mr. Gordon.
Apparently, I'm allergic to closings.
Yes, you're. Now, next time on tonight's TV lineup.
Hold on. Before you do that, hold on. Okay, it's gone. Go ahead.
Okay. We're gonna delve into the world of a man that does not exist. That's right. We're talking about Knight Rider. That's coming up on the next.
Oh, I'm so happy for this one.
Tonight's TV lineup. So make sure you check us out here. Hit that subscribe button. It's DJB Productions Network. Until next time, same bat time, same bat channel. Guys, have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
This concludes our broadcast day for WDJB Productions.